Chapter 62. This venerable one arrives at ancient Lin'an. Their training began without delay. Moran liked feather gathering most. After all, it wasn't like he'd actually expected to learn much from those losers whom he had thoroughly trounced in his last life. Even so, having the funds to indulge himself was where it was at. Every day, before the break of dawn, they went to the ancestral abyss to loot golden feathers. Next up was meditation in Churong cave to refine cultivation by tempering their inner spiritual energy with the burning young energy of the cave. 4 hours after that was demon suppression practice with the feathered tribe. Another 4 hours of that, and they went to Azura Arena to engage in practice matches against one another. Finally, in the evening before night fell, Miss 18 would lecture them on the Demon Compendium and the Art of Exorcism at the scar-gazing cliffs of Peach Blossom Springs. This nightly lesson was of course Moran's favorite time of day, because that was the only lesson attended by cultivators from all 3 specialized divisions. He knew that Shimei wasn't great at Qinggong and worried over whether he had enough to eat, so he made sure to give Shimei half of his harvested feathers every day. Outside of that, they hardly had a chance to interact. Instead, Moran spent every day with Chuaning, and the two gradually became inseparable. During this span of time, they could often be seen together, day in and day out, rain or shine. Chuaning might be sitting on the railing of a bridge, playing a tune on a leaf, with Moran beside him, cheek propped up in one hand. Or Chuaning might be feeding fish by the river, while Moran stood to the side, holding an umbrella, watching the koi fish leap, their golden scales glimmering against waters of clear jade. When it rained at Peach Blossom Springs, Moran would hold Chuaning's hand while they walked along a limestone footpath, its flagstones cracked from age, an oil paper umbrella held evenly above them both. If the rainwater began to collect on the ground, Moran would pick up his little Shidi and carry him on his back, and the boy would cling quietly onto his shoulders as the drops of rain pitter-pattered around them. If the close contact got to be a bit too warm and sweat started to bead on Moran's forehead, the wordless Shidi on his back would reach out and wipe his sweat away with a handkerchief. The handkerchief was plain white with a haitang flower sewn in a corner. Moran kept thinking that it looked familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before, but the careless thought would fly through his mind and soon be lost, like the drizzle of rain falling into a deep pond. One day, Chuaning was resting in the courtyard when Moran undid the boy's braid in a whim and tied his hair into a high ponytail instead. He was halfway through brushing his little Shidi's hair when Ye Wangxi walked in while holding his left shoulder, expression gloomy. Moran, ever observant, raised his eyebrows slightly. Did Ye Shong get injured? Ye Wangxi paused, then furrowed his brows. It's nothing. I just got grazed in a fight. But that guy is truly such a depraved lecher. How despicable. Moran sputtered in disbelief before eventually managing to ask, Did you get groped? What exactly are you imagining? Ye Wangxi asked harshly, glaring daggers. Just kidding. Moran laughed awkwardly, but he couldn't resist his own curiosity. Who was it, though? Who could it be but that flirt from Kunlun Tashur Palace? Ye Wangxi replied. Moran let out an "ah" at these words. Could it be that guy? Recently, he'd been coming across female disciples, whispering amongst themselves, saying Dashishong this and Dashishong that. It was one thing for the younger ones to go on like that, but just a day ago he'd seen a 40 or 50-year-old female cultivator in hysterics by the flower bushes as she muttered with distant eyes, Not a single man in this world could even hope to hold a candle to Dashishong. If only he would look my way, or even speak to me, I'd willingly go to hell with no regrets. Moran had lost it right then and there and erupted in laughter at the lovelorn display. He had a sneaking suspicion as to who this Dashishong might be, but Peach Blossom Springs was full of cultivators who barely even interacted with one another, so, despite hearing this person mentioned time and again, he had never met the guy. He also had at least enough shame to refrain from inserting himself into the gossip of female disciples, so he couldn't be sure. "I was having a drink at Spirit Lake Tavern in the West Market," Yevangshi said. "That bastard happened to be there too, with a girl on each arm. It was depraved. But that's their choice, and none of my business, so I couldn't exactly say anything." "Makes sense," Moran agreed. Then a female Guyur disciple ran in, scanning the crowd with an anxious expression. She was clearly looking for someone. Moran laughed. "Let me guess, she was after Dashishong?" "You've heard of this Dashishong too?" "Ha, well, I mean, if even an upstanding individual like you has heard tell of his philandering ways, how could a gossipy fellow like myself not know?" Yevangshi shot him a wordless glance, then continued. "That Dashishong is truly a piece of work. Turns out, the Guyur girl came looking because he had exchanged tokens of affection with her some days ago, saying he would be her cultivation partner and stay by her side forever." Moran laughed again. "Yeah, that's bullshit. I bet Dashishong has like 17 replicas of that token of affection, one for every girl he's after. Probably spouts the same pledge of undying love, word for word too." Chuaning had been listening quietly, but now he glanced at Moran and said, disgruntled, "Of course you would know." To his surprise, Yevangshi took Moran's side. "Moshong has the right of it. That's exactly the case. That girl was a secret admirer of Dashishong to begin with, so she'd taken him at his word and given him her virginity that very night." "Ayo?" Moran hurriedly covered Chuaning's ears. "What are you doing?" Chuaning asked, unfazed. "Little ones can't listen to this sort of thing. It's bad for your cultivation." Chuaning gave him a withering look. The second Moran was sure that Chuaning's ears were firmly covered, he asked, sparkles in his eyes, "And then?" Yevangshi was a respectable individual. He had no idea that Moran, a rascal, was consuming this recount of righteous indignation like he would some trashy romance. This he replied with an air of integrity. "What do you think? Dashishong denied it, of course. He didn't even want to give her the time of day, let alone have some words. The girl produced the sword tassel he'd given her as a token, but to her surprise, the two girls on Dashishong's arms each pulled out their own. They said that he gives one to every friend, and that it wasn't something reserved for a cultivation partner." That's shameless, all right. Right? I couldn't just sit and watch, so I went over to have a word with him. Yevangshi's expression shifted slightly, and there was a pause before he continued. "The talk went nowhere, so we ended up fighting." Moran smiled. "I see." In actuality, he suspected that this probably wasn't the whole story. If this Dashishong was indeed the person that Moran suspected, then he didn't have the sort of personality that would lead him to come to blows over something like this. Yevangshi had likely omitted details out of embarrassment. However, since Yevangshi didn't elaborate, Moran didn't press the issue and changed the topic. "That Dashishong must be pretty good in a fight then. I can't imagine just any random person being able to land a hit on Yishong." That was evidently the wrong thing to say, as it only seemed to make Yevangshi even more displeased. Fury flickered like a wildfire in those dark eyes. "Pretty good? Yeah, right," Yevangshi said with indignation. He couldn't get any more mediocre. The women did all the fighting for him. What a good-for-nothing. Moran took a closer look at Yevangshi and found that, aside from the sword wound on his shoulder, there were a couple of bloody scratches on his cheek that had obviously come from a woman's nails. He almost fell over laughing. Tashishong sure does live up to his reputation. Chuaning said nothing. He seemed to have been pondering something ever since Ye Wangshi said. The talk went nowhere, so we ended up fighting. He waited until Ye Wangshi left to bandage his wounds in his residence before saying, "Moran?" Moran bobbed his head. "Call me Shishong." After a long, dignified silence, Chuaning continued. "This Shishong, is it Mei Hanchua?" "That's what I suspect," Moran said with a grin. Chuaning fell silent again, deep in thought. Then, as if suddenly coming to a realization, his eyes opened wide. "Could it be that Ye Wangshi got—" "Shh, quiet!" Moran raised a finger to his lips in a hushing gesture, then crouched down to Chuaning's height, smiling. "Aren't you a little too young to be thinking about that stuff?" "I've often heard that this Mei Hanchua person is very unconventional, that he's done all sorts of preposterous things. To think that he'd dare have a go at a disciple of Ru Feng's sect." Moran laughed. "Unconventional is one way to put it. Anyway, let's stay out of other people's business. Here, let Shishong finish putting your hair up. I saw a pretty hair clasp while I was out on the West Street earlier, and it wasn't too pricey either, so I grabbed it. Let's have you try it on." Just as Moran didn't care for Chuaning's taste, Chuaning was less than impressed with Moran's. He stared silently at the overly vibrant and honestly gaudy hair clasp, which was decorated with golden orchids and butterflies. "Are you sure that's for me?" "Yep. Little kids should wear lively colors like red and gold." Chuaning continued to stare in mute horror and fascination. He sincerely didn't want it, but when he thought about it, this was the first time that Moran had ever given him something. He closed his mouth and said nothing, face full of gloom, as Moran fastened the clasp to his ponytail. The golden orchids and butterflies glimmered garishly against his long, inky hair. Chuaning lowered his lashes. Suddenly, he felt that this wasn't bad. This kind of color, this kind of Moran, this kind of himself. If he was in his true form, none of this would have happened. It was as if the butterflies had come from a dream. The clouds overhead shifted and colored as sun and moon chased one another across the sky. Half a year of training at Peach Blossom Springs flew by in the blink of an eye. Miss 18 had said that they would be tested at the half-year mark to gauge their progress. "This will be your first test since coming here," 18 announced gracefully to the assembly. "The content of the trial will differ depending on your division, with 3 different disaster scenarios. Those of you in the defense division will enter the domain of Blood River, those in the healing division will enter the domain of Great Sorrows, and those in the attack division will enter the domain of Fiends. Each of these 3 scenarios will unfold in an illusory realm that has been constructed using memories of the Ghost Realm invasion hundreds of years ago. You will be in no danger while within them, and you will be returned here once you have resolved the crisis therein. Up to 2 people may enter the illusory realm at a time. In other words, you may face the challenge alone or invite one other person to accompany you. As for the order of testing, that will be announced by the envoys Anan." The assembly was dismissed and the tests began. Moran didn't know how things were going over in the defense and healing divisions, but at least for the attack division, half a dozen people had already gone through it and had all done pretty well. It seemed the trial wasn't too hard. 10 days later, it was Moran's turn. 18 was in charge in the attack division, and she smiled as she asked, "Will Mo Shanxian be going with a partner?" Moran thought about it. "If I choose someone to go with me, would they be exempt from going through the trial again?" "Of course." "Then I'll bring my Shidi." Moran pointed at Chu Wanning. "He's still young, so I worry if he goes it alone." The moon hung bright overhead as they followed 18 to a pitch-black cave. A thin layer of reddish-gold mist covered the entrance. "Please listen well," said 18. "The scene within the domain of fiends is one from the calamity 200 years ago, the first rupture of the ghost realm barrier. Because the barrier could not be repaired in time, a mass of vengeful ghosts and malicious spirits escaped into the mortal realm and slaughtered countless living beings. The illusory realm is an emulation of the event based on the memories of a survivor from Ran An during that time. Stepping into this cave will bring you to the battle-torn Ran An city of 2 centuries ago. Slay the Ghost King leading the army, and the illusion will dissipate on its own." Moran glanced at Chuaning, then turned to smile at 18. "Big sis, I'm sturdy, so it's whatever. But my Shidi is only 6, and swords don't have eyes. What if he gets injured?" "There is no need to fear. The weapons inside the illusion will bring you no true harm," 18 explained. "Any injuries you sustain will be marked with a spiritual signifier and nothing more. However, if you are marked in a vital area, representing a fatal injury, you will fail the trial." Relieved, Moran clasped his hands together and grinned. "I see. Thank you for the kind consideration." And so, Ran and Chu Wanning headed into the test without fear. The cave was pitch black. Setting foot within it felt like missing a step. It was as if their bodies were abruptly suspended in mid-air. This sensation was immediately followed by a series of blurry images that flashed before their eyes. A legion of contorted faces flowed together into a river passing below them. When their feet landed back on solid ground, they found themselves transported to ancient Ran An, on a road at the outskirts of the city. The noon sun blazed above, and a putrid smell filled the air. The sight of old Ran An city of 200 years past, plagued nightly by hordes of ghosts and accompanied by the heavy stench of rotting flesh, unfolded slowly before their eyes like a withered scroll scorched by the flames of war.